What's up, Black Comic Lords? It's your boy Paul. Once again, we're on with one of our super dope Black comic creator interviews, and we have with us Mr. Bryan Hill.
Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you?
We are here, man.
Welcome back.
I am swimming in the stream
as
of life.
Birds Without Fear says. I'm going to jump right into it.
Mm-hmm.
You've been busy since last time you were here. You were here almost exactly a year ago, so I found out.
About a year ago.
Yeah. So let's. You've got several books that you've worked on. When last you were here, you were I think you were just starting Blade. You had just started Ultimate Black Panther. Since then we've had Blood Hunt. Ultimate Black Panther has been Black Panthering. And now you've got a new book called The Power Company Recharge for DC as well. So look, we're going to get into each and every one of those. Let's start with Blade. All right. So when this series ended, Blade had fought the big bad Adana, the evil demon from hell. The personification of all things evil. Big face-off, ultimately defeated her. But here's a couple interesting things, because this was the precursor to Blood Hunt, which was the big crossover event from last year with Jed McKay.
Right.
Shout out to everybody in the chat, by the way. We see you. Keep your questions coming. We're going to do a question and answer at the end. And I'm surprised my producer didn't call me out on this. If you're joining us right now, please like the video, share the video, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. All right. There's a couple things that I thought I wanted to ask you about.
Please.
In this final issue, it says, "I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of what I need to become to destroy you." And then there's this comment about, this, you sure you got them all? How, wow, you done? You done? And he looks like he's possessed for a second, then he becomes normal. And then you've got his homegirl talking about this guy, this demon put a demon in me. As we learned in Blood Hunt, ultimately he was possessed. Was it is this the moment? Was the setup for Adana and how Adana was defeated? Was that what led to Varney, in your mind, taking over Blade?
Not in a directly causal way, but in a bit of a character way. Like, best way to explain it. So everything that we experience in life, everything that we do, creates new potentiality and possibility within us, right? If we go through an extreme moment, we now have the experience of having gone through the extreme moment. It's how you can get a person from being a normal person and turn them into a killer, with training, basically. By continuing to put them in extreme environments, they respond. The level of violence they've been able to cause rises and rises and rises, and before they know it, they're able to kill other human beings. Right? So with Blade, it's not a literal, this is the reason why. But I did feel that the extremity of the experience with the Adana arc, the rebonding with the Byzantine aspects of his vampire side, the training from Dracula, the evocation of those new powers, he opened up new doors inside of him as a person. And it's likely that those doors he opened up made it somewhat easier for Varney to find home within him.
That makes sense.
So that's sort of how I look at it philosophically, right? Like, everything that we do, everything we experience becomes a new precedent for us. And when you're dealing with these superhero characters, they're going to this on a higher level because they're in higher levels of extremity. It's survival, right? And that was what I wanted to explore a little bit, and I think that's probably the relationship there.
That actually makes 100% sense. The fact that he drank Dracula's blood in order to unlock these new powers, and then that in and of itself opens him up to the evil of Varney coming inside of him. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, Blade is a character that's got a very long-standing relationship with repression in a lot of ways, right? He disciplines himself quite a bit. I think that's why his relationship to what we would call Bushido is very strong, because you read the Hagakure, and a lot of the Hagakure, Hagakure is the book of the samurai. It's like a feudal era text that I read a lot, just in my own personal life. And if you read the Hagakure, a lot of it is martial philosophy and instruction for sure, but a big part of it is the disciplining of emotion, is being able to recognize your emotion, to discipline it, to harness it, to reroute it, and to sometimes dampen it when necessary to accomplish a goal. And Blade takes that to an extreme place because of what he is, right? So when you repress, and I don't think that Blade's praxis, his life practice, is particularly healthy. Marwan had that in the Book of Five Rings, Miyamoto Musashi-san, yeah. When growing up, I was very much, well, we can get to that in a second, but so I don't think Blade has the healthiest relationship to his praxis, right? So he's repressing a lot of things, and that builds a tension if you don't manage it effectively. Right? You can look at a lot of characters. I mean, there's plenty of polemic ways you can look at characters. One of the ways you can look at them in polemics is you can look at a character in terms of repression and expression. Right? Some characters are more expression, some characters are more repression, right? And that's kind of the thing that defines how they interact, how they conflict resolve, and all the other stuff. And I think Blade is holding himself down a lot, but the stoic water covers up a lot of jagged rocks at the bottom, and I wanted to get into all that character wise, and have a character who is evil, but in a way far more resolved than he is. A character doesn't have conflict around it. The Adana is a function as much as she is a character, and to have him face something that isn't wrought at all with his self-recrimination would challenge that repression. So yeah, the things I like to play with, I try to find a psychological, emotional way into these characters that appeals to me, and that kind of drew me into that.
Hey, shout out to everyone with the super chat. Thank you, Anthony Davis, Marwan Williams, and AJ. Appreciate the love. All right, so that led to Blood Hunt. Fantastic crossover. And I don't think anyone was expecting the fact that Blade was going to be the big bad. And certainly not the center of the entire crossover. But it left some scars. You had written the Midnight Suns version, tie-in to the Blood Hunt series. And you start off the book by introducing this team. Again, and I said this to you last time that you're here, your interpretation of Blade, what you've written on Blade, is literally a script for a movie. It actually maddens me because it's like you get upset over the fact that the Blade movie's in such limbo with these script rewrites, and I'm like, it's right there. The man's right there. He's writing a script for a film. Just all you gotta it's even storyboarded for you. All you gotta do is just hire a director and go. It's kind of crazy. It's not that complicated, it would seem.
Many people have brought that up to me. I honestly, I mean, I have never petitioned to do the movie. I assume they have the reasons that they do what they do. I mean, I also write screenplays. I just directed a horror film that I'm in post-production on, my first movie. I've got my second movie coming together. So I'm sure they're aware of me, but I think it's because maybe tonally what I do is a bit more stiff than they need for what they're putting together for the films, right? And I write very much a rated R Blade, and not just in the extremity of violence, but in the adult themes of the book, so I think that might just be it. I think I might just be. I think the sake is too strong, right? So they need something that fits into the cinematic space they're building, and maybe as time goes on, if they put the character in something, they kind of work the character out a little bit. Maybe there'd be some room for something a little darker. Oh yeah, I like Chad very much. I've met him a couple times. We have a mutual friend, a guy named Larnell Stovall, who is a director in his own right. Larnell was a stunt coordinator on Titans when I was writing and producing that show, and then he became a director on Titans. He directed a couple episodes, and Larnell comes from that whole world that Chad is like the shogun of, right? So I've been lucky enough to meet him a couple times, and he's a really dynamic thinker, very driven and determined man, much to respect about Stileski-san. So yeah, we must assume that Marvel has good reasons to do what they're doing. I assume they have good reasons for it. I just hope they just make a movie, honestly, because the character is a great character to explore. And I really want to see. Thank you, Nigel. That's very kind of you. I really want to see like Blade, Ghost Rider. Like, to me, the occult side of Marvel, and this might be a natural feedback into Midnight Suns, is really interesting. And there's a lot to explore there. And I think, how do you work horror into what Marvel's doing, what Feige's doing? That would be a really interesting question to try to solve in a project.
Yeah. To your point about writing adult themes, I got excited because opening page, Blade's got a team. He's assembled this badass G.I. Joe looking, vampire hunting team. I'm like, Bryan Edward Hill just expanded the Blade universe. Blade has always been a solo guy. Until he had his team with like Hannibal King and those guys, and those teams never really last all that long. So he's finally put together another vampire hunting team.
Well,
and then he kills him.
And then he kills him. Well, so I look at Blade a bit like Bond in a way. James Bond. We have a character who has done what they've done all over the world. They have met people we haven't met. They have made choices we haven't seen. The effect of those unseen choices still exists somewhere in the world. I think there's a lot of possibility there. And it stood to reason for me that he would have people that he trained at some point to task what he does, and we could meet them, without belaboring the introduction. It would just make sense. It's like if Bond meets someone overseas and they have an old relationship, you never question it because, like, well, he's James Bond, so he must have bumped into Indian Secret Service at some point. He must have bumped into this Jamaican, arms smuggler at some point, right? Like, he just knows people. And I think Blade's one of those characters that just knows people and has just done things. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to do with the character was expand the universe of Blade and seed things in to create narrative possibility. I always try to leave the house a little bigger than when I left it in terms of possibility. You give me a character that I don't own, a story that I don't own, but it's my job to manage the store for a certain amount of time. What I want to do is create more things in the world that other people can play with and explore as they will.
Here's a cool question from Eclectic Birdie. He always routinely has great questions for us. Do you think Blade would be as focused or efficient if he didn't go through that trauma and bottle it up? Would a well-adjusted Eric Brooks who grew up with a family still fight evil?
Very good question.
Very good question.
I think to have the stern stuff that Blade has, to have that determinism, at some point when you were vulnerable, you needed to have been hurt by evil, I think. To have the relationship he has with his vulnerability, his mortality, the immortality, the relationship with violence. The question that Eclectic Blurred is really asking is, would a child who grew up in comfort pick up the sword? Right? And
like that, man.
And I would wager no. No, I don't think they would. And I think that in any kind of warrior, especially a warrior that's so self-determined, so driven. I mean, Blade's basically a Ronin, essentially, masterless samurai. I think to be that, the scales of life were put out of balance in some way within you, and you seek to balance them in perpetuity, right? I think that also drives people like me. I think that if my father hadn't died when I was a kid, it was cancer. It wasn't like violence, but I think if I hadn't lost my father as a kid, and I would have had a more my upbringing was actually very stable. My mother worked tirelessly to make sure I had a safe home environment. But had I had more of the average experience, I'm not sure I would be a storyteller, because I'm not sure I would have the desire to fix a broken world through storytelling, to explore these things. So I do think that with people like Blade, there is some sort of trauma there that motivates.
All right. So after Blood Hunt ended, there was another red band edition of Blade. As you said, your version of Blade might not be to some studio execs liking, because it's a rated
look
R
at that.
version.
That is not a 4-quadrant movie poster we're looking at right now. That's a 2-quadrant movie poster.
Yeah, your cover sets the tone for the entire series. Blade, at this point, Blade realized he became the big bad. He was taken over. This is a guy who's always had control. His life has been about control, right? Because he's always fighting that demon that's within him, and he's always has to focus on being controlled. And to have that ripped away from him by Varney and used against his friends in the Avengers and try to take over the world and almost try to kill his own daughter, he felt some kind of way about that. And so he goes on a bit of a, I don't know, how would you phrase it, a walkabout or what have you.
Yeah, he goes on essentially like a self-imposed exile.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and that's the writer self-inserting. When I have times of great stress, when I've gone through a conflict or taken a wound and I need to heal, not literally, thankfully, but, you know, whether professionally or spiritually or emotionally, I tend to retreat into solitude. I was an only child growing up. So my relationship to solitude is different than I think a lot of other people's. There's that line from Michael Mann's Heat that I'm a big fan of when Neil says, I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. Right. So, you know, we all find our ways into a character. I think we have to understand their behavior often through our behavior, when we have to make them real, when they are not real people. And for me, I'm like, he needs time to himself now. He needs to get away from both people that are judging him for what transpired and people that are immediately absolving him for what transpired. We have to have our own relationship to the things we've done that disturb us, that bother us. And just as being judged for it while we're dwelling on it is destructive, so can being absolved of things too early, right? We want to walk our own path at our own pace. So I wanted him to be in exile and be in a natural environment, you know, going back to the roots of the disciplines that he studied, you know, the daily life of hunting, cooking, drinking blood, you know, even if he doesn't eat the meat off the fish, right?
Even
like,
from a samurai's perspective, you have him build his own sword. And that is such a big thing.
Yeah, the relationship, because ultimately we all have our sword, right, in life. Everyone who's watching this or listening to this, we each have our own katana in life, our tool that we trust when everything else fails us. It can be our imagination. It can be our humor. It can be our will to endure. It can be our love. It can be our determination, right? But we all have that katana that we have built our relationship with, right? We have sculpted it through practice. We have depended on it when we needed it. It served us well, and we have mastered its use ideally. And that's a relationship that we have with these things. And so for a warrior, that relationship often will be with the weapon itself. And there's a spiritual aspect to it. You think about literal katana over in the other universe, whose sword has the spirit of her husband in it.
Yeah,
it's almost a riff on the Japanese idea of kami, the spirits that infuse material things. But yeah, he had to get back to the essence of things.
Right.
You ever heard that story about Sammy Davis Jr.?
Which one?
About when he got into the car accident, how he learned how to dance again?
No, I hadn't heard that.
So he gets in this car accident, massive car accident. One, he loses his eye. And he can't dance because two eyes required for balance. And he is like, well, I don't know how I can be me if I can't do this. And he doesn't remain despondent for long. He locks himself in an auditorium for a weekend and just forces himself to dance all weekend until he can get it back. And then by Monday or Tuesday, he had it back and was like, hey, Rat Pack, I'm ready to go again. Right? And I always thought that was kind of an inspirational thing, just kind of going back to the critical aspects of who you are and rebuilding from the ground up. Sometimes we have to do that.
Shout out to N. Stephen Harris. Saw you out
Steve!
There. Appreciate you. We need to have you on the show.
Yeah, we need to have. I've worked with Steve before.
Like
I've known Steve for, let me tell you, I've known Steve for a very long time. I've known Steve, gosh, going on 20 plus years, you know, back when, in Star Wars terms, I was a story Padawan. I was working with this guy, Walter McDaniel. He was a 90s era comic book artist, and Steve was around the studio where I met, you know, that's when I met Joe Illidge. It's where I met Chris Cross. It's where I met Kari during those days. He wasn't in often, but I met him during that time. It was time in New York, you know, so it's, yeah, I've known Steve for a long, long time. Good to see you, Steve.
I met him once last year in Brooklyn at Bulletproof Comics.
He's a great guy, genuine guy, nice guy.
Yeah, we need to have you on the show, Steven. Email us at
very talented
comiclords@gmail.com.
We've only worked briefly in recent years, but yeah, mainly because I never suggest artists to the editors. I let the editors decide who they want to pick, and sometimes they pick an old friend. But yeah, Steve's great. Support his work, support him, follow him on social media if he's there. I can't speak highly enough about him.
All right, so Blades in the Solitude. He's eating his fish. He's making his sword. He's having deep thoughts, and he's approached by this guy, who is representative of a new group. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah, so this is, again, me wanting to expand the world. So this group, the Spell Guard. So when we think about occultism in the Marvel Universe, we tend to only think about the Sorcerer Supreme, their little group, and the individual magic users, like a magic here, you know, a Satana here, like what have you. And I think, like, well, occultism is occultism. There's going to be factions and groups. Like, one of the people that I admire most in world creation is a man named Mike Pondsmith. I don't know if you're familiar with Mike, but Mike is the creator of the Cyberpunk RPG that ultimately became Cyberpunk 2077, the video game.
Okay.
And
also comic book too. Yeah.
Mike's a genius. His mind is incredibly impressive. He's a black guy. And that's why I first knew about him, because I was like, oh, wow, there's another black guy that was really into science fiction and cyberpunk and world building. And so one of the things that I do to sharpen my blade as a storyteller is I love reading RPG manuals and how they build worlds and stories and the interconnected and the factions and the rest of it. I think it's incredibly useful to storytelling to look at. You know, I'm not a huge sword and sorcery guy, so I'm not going to spend much time with Dungeons and Dragons, but I spend a lot of time with Cyberpunk. And I just thought that, well, there should be other spell casters. There should be other people seeking to work with the occult. Whenever there is a throne, there are people that want it. Many people that want it. And so the Spell Guard are a group that I created that represents a more renegade faction of occultism and potential occult users in the Marvel universe. And I, again, with that Ian Fleming touch, you know, you want to introduce a group of characters that knock on Bond's door. They found him somehow. and now they want him to do a thing, right? You know, and one of the story forms I love is bad people who want you to go after worse people, right? I think that's a good kickoff engine for a story, because it creates like this kind of double threat from both the people that are coming to you and the people that you're going after. And it really tests the ethics of a character to decide, like, who is the evil here, right? And that was the big thing over this miniseries, was you had a character that was asking themselves in many ways, am I evil? Reconciling with the evil they had done. I wanted to put that character in a story where they would have to question externally, who is the evil here? And by clarifying their sense of the true evil they were dealing with, they would also by proxy reconcile the relationship they had with some evil deeds that their hands had done.
It was interesting how you handled this, because it was a very the defining Blade moment. Blade is in his feelings, chilling, trying to get his thoughts together. This dude comes along. He's like, look, I'm a bad dude who represents bad dudes. I'm the emissary of some bad dudes.
I mean, he looks like a bad guy. He's not really hiding the ball on it, right? He's like, we're bad. We're bad.
We wanna elicit your help to defeat an even badder bad dude.
Even badder guy.
And so from their perspective, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Logic-wise, you're going to come join us in this helicopter, and we're going to go take out the bad dude, because that's what you do, Blade. Blade's reaction was, get off my lawn, or I'm going to kill you.
Right.
No, you don't understand. This is a bad dude that we want you to go after. He's worse than us. He's a complete bad guy. He's like, get off my lawn, or I'm going to kill you. Well, you can't escape us. He kills the dude. But then he kills the dude, but then says, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and find this guy and kill him.
Well, you got to turn over on its head, right? Like Blade, unfortunately for those members of the Spell Guard that came to him, they gave Blade too much information.
Yeah.
And he is not a man made to serve, right? So he's going to make his own choices there.
To your point, when you talk about Blade, almost has the Bushido code, right? The samurai Bushido code. Someone said here, and in that code, he has the sense as a samurai of a sense of, what is it called, giri, right? A sense of honor, a sense of duty, and so that at this point is his giri moment, where he is letting that sense of honor and duty overcome his own self-doubt. So I thought this was a cool moment, and the way to have him do that is, a big bad is asking me to defeat another big bad, but let me kill this big bad before I go get the bigger bad.
Right.
I thought that was a cool defining moment. So that was well done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's sort of the I'm playing with a lot of things you see in a lot of warrior fiction, right? I mean, it's the, if you're looking at it in a samurai context, it's the Ronin dealing with the warlords, with the daimyo, and how does a Ronin deal with the daimyo? Or you look at Robert E. Howard's work with Conan, right? Conan wishes to be Conan with his relationship to Crom and Steel in a world of rulers and politicians and the apparatus of even commerce around Conan, and Conan cares not for all of this. His relationship.
I'm for it.
My relationship with Steel. I don't care about any of it. So
help me, or to hell with you.
The hell with you. Crom laughs at your four winds. So that's a classic thing, right? Like that, and that's and I think Blade. That's why I love writing Blade, because Blade is so coded with mythological storytelling, and I love that stuff. But there's this little bit of like punk rock in it too that you can always use,
your writing on Blade is the most introspective on the character I've seen, the most character developing I've seen, I think, ever.
Well, thank you. That's very kind to say.
No, and I don't say that for lip service. If I didn't like it, I'd just tell you or not bring you on the show. I genuinely love your writing on Blade. The fact that you explore the occult, and I think I mentioned this to you before. This is a guy who's hundreds of years old, and he spends his time battling things that go bump in the night. He learns a couple tricks along the way.
Sure.
And I love the fact that you're one of the first writers to really, deeply explore the fact that he uses those tricks as part of his arsenal. He's not just a guy with vampire powers who runs around with a sword and just chops people up. He's smart. He's intelligent. He's tactical. He'll use whatever he can at his disposal to defeat his enemy.
Well, it's one of the when you look at occultist traditions, whether it's Western European or East Asian or South American, or the American derivations of that, underneath a lot of it is an idea about the reconciliation of opposites, right? It's about integration. When we talk about alchemy, the alchemist's goal wasn't to turn coal into gold. That might have been a thought that the alchemists had, a physical manifestation. But a lot of that is coded language about the self, and how do you refine the self from the coal state to the gold state. And a lot of that is about the reconciliation of things. And so it's not necessarily what Blade was learning in the first series, and what Dracula was trying to impart with him, which is something that Dracula understands very well, is you've got to be able to walk through the jungle without becoming the jungle, but you still need to be able to use the jungle, right? And until you can, you're fighting your war one arm behind your back. And you can't fight Adana like that. You can't fight something truly free while you're bound. It will not work. So integration is a big kind of thematic idea I like to explore. Like, how do we integrate? Oh yeah, Marwan's got the idea right there. How do we integrate, these seemingly disparate aspects of ourselves? And if I can say something somewhat controversial, I think that because a lot of the West has been mired in the structural aspects of Judeo-Christian thought, we have within Western culture an abhorrence and a revulsion to the things that are outside of the holy. And we just need to lock them up, shun them, punish those that are curious, and hope they go away. But ultimately, I think pushing something into the dark just gives it cover to grow and evolve. And I think you need to be able to confront these things. You have to look into the abyss in order to master whatever pull the abyss has on you, right? And in other philosophies, if you look at East Asian philosophy, you look at African philosophy, you look at Middle Eastern philosophy, you see a bit more of that thinking. Less about sort of like Western European repression and more about integration to ultimately find peace.
So you also introduce some new characters, expanding Blade's universe. What was your inspiration behind this character?
Well, I currently think we live in a cyberpunk dystopia. We just don't have all of the aesthetics yet. But the sentence I'm about to say is entirely accurate. A former reality television host is president of the United States while being convicted of over 30 felonies. His closest advisor is the unelected richest man in the world, who donated hundreds of millions of dollars to the president's campaign, who built a fortune first on digital commerce, then on electric cars, who now has a global internet apparatus called Starlink. He has funded an artificial intelligence called Grok. He wishes to put chips in our heads. And his name is Elon Musk. All of that is accurate. That sounds like science fiction. That sounds like William Gibson when I say it, without judging it. I'm not judging this on a political level. I'm just saying that this is the world that we live in right now. Now, and again, going to Pondsmith's work, and I'm going to get to Blade in a second, and going to Pondsmith's work, the only, not even a criticism, the only commentary I would have on Mike's brilliant work is the technology would never be that shared. Right? Like if you had the ability to be transhuman, to augment yourself with cybernetic parts, it would never be something the working class had access to. It would only be for the upper class. And you're seeing it in thoughts about eugenics, gene therapy, right?
Yeah.
The idea of being able to genetically prevent aberrations in your child. Well, that will be something you would have to pay for.
Yeah.
Right? Think about a world where if your child who's getting educated right now doesn't have access to artificial intelligence, does not know how to use things like ChatGPT or Grok or what have you, they're literally growing up with less fluency than someone else who has access. That access costs money. So we're creating this kind of technocast society. And I wanted to put Ubermenschen, right? Like I wanted to put a touch of cyberpunk into Blade, right? Just to, again, sometimes I see things in for the possibility so that I can return to them in a more detailed way later. But I've put things in the world to consider, and that's another thing I think about with the Marvel Universe is we usually deal with normies and superheroes, and then sometimes we deal with like S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. And when we see transhuman aesthetics, it's like Winter Soldier or something, right? It's the $1 billion version of it. But if there's a $1 billion version of it, there's also a $200 version of it. That's how life works. If there's a high-end elite market, there is naturally a black market. That's how life works. And I just think there's room in the Marvel Universe for cyberpunk stuff, cyberpunk characters to explore. Who else could get augmented and how would they get augmented and what those sites would look like. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons why, and again, this is apolitical. I'm not coming down on one side or the other. I'm just discussing what's really happening. One of the reasons why we're having these seemingly ridiculous conversations about Greenland, one of the reasons why we are waffling on our support of Ukraine without these conditions is because rare earth minerals are a resource that powers technology.
Yeah.
And the West, we don't make any of those in America. We don't have any of them. The minerals that they need, they're in Ukraine, they're in Africa. It's why you see China taking a deep investment into Africa, because Africa has access to rare earth minerals, because the technology requires it. So, yeah, like I just, I'm thinking about it a lot, and I just wanted to sort of have Blade's world be, somewhat reflective of it, just a little insert of that in there, because I genuinely think we're living in a cyberpunk world right now. Cyberpunk is real. If Cyberpunk 2077 is the video game, then we're in like Cyberpunk, 2010 or something.
Yeah, they kind of talk about that a little bit on the page before this one, where Blade is commenting on her prosthetic, and he's like, I've never seen a prosthetic, something that looks like that. And her response is, that's because they're used to hanging out with the rich superheroes that can afford, the Starks and the Wakandan technology type thing.
Sure.
This is what the other half lives. This is stuff that we can afford.
Yeah, I mean, in a world of Tony Starks, you're going to have Justin Hammers, and you're going to have people lesser than Justin Hammer that are also doing things, right? Like you're going to have a black market, kind of illegal sort of thing, and it's just one of those things that I just think is unexplored in the MU, but like certainly exists there and could be something really cool.
Yeah, your writing often explores the dirty underbelly that Marvel doesn't do. For example, the island that they're on, is very much like Madripoor.
Sure.
Right? But it's like if Madripoor is Walmart, this is like Family Dollar.
Well, so
This is-
many years ago, I wrote a animated feature in Thailand. It's called Nine Satra. It's about Muay Thai. And I don't think it ever came out in America, but people have seen it overseas. And so I was going back and forth to Bangkok for the better part of 2 years, really. And I would spend, like a month there every time. Your visa resets after a month, right? So you only get a 30 days. So I'd have to cross the border into Vietnam, then come back into Thailand and get the visa reset. And I like Thailand very much. I like Bangkok very much. And so I'm not besmirching Bangkok at all. But there was an air of danger in the city. Like there was a coffee shop that I was having lunch with the guys I was working with. And, we had a lunch and I went back to the hotel they put me up in and all that. And I think the next day someone had ridden up on like a moped and sprayed from like a MAC-10 or a Uzi, taking out somebody, innocent people got in the way. Right. And it was a place that had that kind of crackle of someone can jump off here at any time.
Right.
And it stayed with me that. And again, like Bangkok's lovely. Go to Bangkok. They just had an earthquake, so I hope everyone there's okay. I checked in with my friends. They were doing all right. I'm not warding people off from going to Southeast Asia, but yeah, again, like we tend to go to the same places over and over again in these books, and the world's a big place. There's a way to expand where we are, and then some places just don't have that level of importance. They may not have a marquee comic book character that's set up there to make this place like a theater that like S.H.I.E.L.D. would care about, right? It might just be a place that's got some augmented hyper real people that doesn't really have a socio-economic reason for the elite of the Marvel universe to particularly care about it.
Yeah.
And those worlds are interesting to me. And I think, whenever we think about being part of the corporate side of storytelling, when you're, being hired into a world that you don't create, you just kind of add things to, I think you're always asking yourself, like, what do I bring to this that like somebody else probably wouldn't, right? What makes me able to give a reader a unique experience? Because if I don't feel like I can do that, then I probably won't do a project. And so with Blade, because of the nature of who Blade is, because of, I think, the audience for Blade being having a stiff upper lip about things. Yeah, it can be a little sexier. It can be a little dangerous. It can have some reckless ideas in it. That's entertaining to me. That's why you never really see me writing like, Peter Parker. Like, I've got nothing against Peter Parker. I like Spider-Man very much. I did a Miles Morales one-shot with Nelson Blake I enjoyed. But that's not the best way to use me, right? Yeah. Like, there are times when you need to hire a diplomat. There are times we need to hire an entertainer. And then there are times we need to hire a killer. And hire me when you need to hire a killer. That's how I look at it.
Speaking of killers, your big bad he had this moment where he meets this woman who's working in this hospital. Mm-hmm. And he actually starts to crack jokes. He's like, "Hey, I'm the big bad. I'm the one that your mom warned you about. I'm the thing that goes bump in the night." Mm-hmm. And she's clearly scared, fearful for her life. He's like, No. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm bad, but I'm not that bad. I need your help with some things. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe he's not that bad. Pontius is not that bad. But then he ultimately does something which I'm not going to show here. Because it's beyond being spoilery. It's just so it's graphically jarring what he does to her. And it just made me hate him that much more. And I'm like, that's good writing. He lured me in by have this guy crack jokes that made you sort of emotionally disarmed that maybe he may have some redeeming qualities because if he has a sense of humor, he can't possibly be that bad. And then he's like brutally murders this woman. Was that intentional?
Well, yeah, you know, one of the things that I think we as people we hesitate to do is accept that someone just doesn't have the parts, that conscience may not live within them, empathy may not live within them, and people without it can use that to lower our defenses, because it's not in our nature to believe that about other people, right? And I mean, you see it in politics all the time. You know, the idea of, well, if I just do this, the other side will understand. Well, if you just said this, then they wouldn't do that. Well, they can't really want to reduce that agency and let people die, right? Like, that's not what they want to do. They very well might. They might not have the part, right? Like, they may prey upon the parts of society that likes to give people the benefit of the doubt. So, you know, I wanted a villain that was gonna kind of take advantage of that. I mean, how many people have cowered in front of him? How many people have pleaded and begged and screamed and fought in some ineffectual way? He would know what to say to reduce that conflict, so he could do what he ultimately wants to do, you know. And I think that's right. You know, some people just want to watch the well done.
Yeah.
and I think that it's true, right? And you know, I think, again, like, I'm being apolitical, like, you know, I guess I'll reveal somewhat of my politics. I tend to think that in the current moment, people are not recognizing people for what they are. I'll just say that. And I think it's horrifying to recognize people for what they are. Because, one, it makes us feel unsafe. Because if that's true, then none of us are safe. Two, the recognition of that comes with an inherent responsibility to do something about it. And we shirk that too. So, yeah, so sometimes evil is just evil, no matter what it says, no matter how elegant it is or charismatic it is, you know.
Or how you try to rationalize it.
Or how you try to rationalize it, right? Like, the fact is, you know, like, if you're looking at people that are intent on reduction at all costs, that means that somewhere they have made a calculus that we do not care if people die. We do not care if you lose your home. We do not care if you lose your job. We do not care if you can't pay for your kids' tuition. We do not care. We are going to be unflinching about this ultimate goal, but we don't care because it won't affect us. And we honestly don't need you in our future anyway.
Because we are the oligarchy.
Because we deserve the future and you don't, because you're not one of us.
Yeah.
And some of you will make it, and that will be fine. But we don't need to preserve your lives. We don't need to protect you in any way. You don't need to be part of the continuing project. You're just a number, right? And until we reconcile with it, until we can just stand up, point out of the window, and say with a clear voice, Gojira, right? We're just going to watch cities burn. And at some point, you have to recognize that's Gojira. Right there. Now what are we going to do?
So, on top of all that, one of the things that I also enjoyed about your writing on Blade, which makes you in my opinion, a definitive Blade writer,
Oh dear.
is the fact that you expand his power set.
Mm.
You had him in your first series drink Dracula's blood.
Mm-hmm.
Say, I don't want to drink your blood. No, stop being a baby. Drink the blood. It's good for you.
Mm-hmm.
Amongst his power set, he can now turn himself into a wolf, into bats, into mist.
Mm-hmm.
And now apparently he can actually taste blood and see things. Explain this power set.
So I very much subscribe to the Byzantine Gothic aspects of vampirism. The idea that vampires are sentient and related to all types of the arcane, right? The kind of Stoker or Nosferatu elements of vampirism. I kind of reject vampirism as a thing of science and go back to those things. Partly because I'm just a Castlevania kid, and I grew up on Alucard and stuff like that, right? It never leaves the blood, So I wanted to expand his power set. I wanted to give him more things that happen when you press different buttons on the controller. I was like, well, he should be able to do a measure of this and do a measure of that. And maybe it costs something of him to do it. And there's, thinking in gaming terms, there's a meter or whatever, right? And so there's if I was designing a Blade game, I would definitely want these powers in there. I want, the violence would build up to the ability to do the thing, and then you could press hold down trigger, and you could press left bumper, and then you would be able to turn into mist and defend himself or whatever, or turn into a wolf and leap at somebody with the screen change color, right? I do think about things in very kinetic video game terms when doing this stuff. Now, this idea of him being able to experience things with blood, well, look, you've got the scientific aspects of epigenetic memory and the whole thing. But I just tend to go to the spiritual, right? Like Kanan says, powers of vampire royalty, right? The idea that something of us is contained within our blood. Why do vampires drink blood? Right? That's the question. It's not just because of the hemoglobin. It's not because they just need more white blood cells. It's because I think there's something spiritual there that passes into them, that feeds them, that's what that's about. Yeah, that's what I'd be doing, Marvel Rivals, man. It's you want, Blade should have a more dynamic skill tree. That would be my thing, right? If I was, approaching Blade in gaming or even in a film or whatever, I'd be seeking to have more nodes on the skill tree.
Let's I want to take a couple of the questions that we've had from the chat on Blade. There was one here from Eclectic Blurty Niche. Does the ending of Blood Hunt change the status of Chernobyl being the capital city of vampires and Blade's status as the sheriff?
No, I think Jason's story is still very much in place. I think Blade is sheriff in Jason's story. He's a sheriff like Shane is a sheriff in a way, right? And I think he's a sheriff that walks off into the sunset at some point, but can always return. So I like Jason's work very much. I mean, he's one of my favorite storytellers, Jason Aaron. So I certainly didn't want to step on what he was doing. So no, I think those two things can definitely coexist for sure.
Another one from Eclectic Blurty Niche. He's always got great questions. Since Blade is way older than he looks, could he possibly have more children out there like Namor or Wolverine?
Entirely possible. Entirely possible. I mean, I haven't discussed that with Marvel, the idea of doing it, because I haven't dealt with his current daughter in the universe. Not because I am opposed to the character. People have brought that up. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's that I felt like Blade just needed some time by himself in his own book, with his own kind of compatriots, but where he was the only thing like him in the book, right? And I wanted to write something that let people just kind of hop onto the character. And to me, if you hop on to a character and the first story you're getting is they're a parent of another character, then for me, parenting is often about handing things over to a new generation, right? It's about platforming the youth to take the mantle, as it were. And I just felt like Blade had been around a long time, but didn't really have a lot of like things, appearances, yes, but like, what is that run that you're going to put in front of actor whomever and say, read this, right? Like, what's that thing, that you're going to recommend to someone? I've never read Blade before. And I don't know if I've been able to achieve that with the work that I've done, but that was certainly what I was trying to do, was to make things that were at least closer to something like that. But I do think it's entirely possible. I mean, he's been alive for a very long time, right? I mean, he's a bit like Highlander, so like, he's loved and lost and loved and been betrayed, and he thought she was dead, and then she came back and wasn't dead. I'm sure he's gone through all that stuff.
I could totally see you writing a Highlander comic. That would be dope.
Well, there can be only one.
Mighty Mr. J says, if this was confirmed already, I apologize. Is Blade run going to continue?
I'm going to return to Blade for sure. We've definitely spoken about it. So my work on Blade will continue. We don't know exactly what form it is, and a lot of it has to do with my schedule, guys. Like, I'm very focused on writing and directing my own films now. You haven't seen the horror film. It's called Archangel. It stars Connor Leslie from Titans. She was Wonder Girl in Titans. And she's a good friend of mine, and she's great in the film. And so very happy with that. And I have a new film I'm working on, and things in the director space that I'm really focused on. So I don't know how much time I have to do like monthlies, really. Meaning, Ultimate Black Panther I'm still working on, what have you. So what I would expect from me in comics going forward, outside of Ultimate Black Panther, is probably miniseries, right? Like, the next thing that I want to do with Blade, and we haven't talked story plot. Well, I've talked some ideas, but I haven't locked it down yet, like the exact thing that I want to do, but it's in process. But what I definitely want to do is do that 4 to 5 issue literary miniseries, right? Like, that feels like, not stylistically, but just like the narrative meal of like Frank Miller's Ronin, right? Like the narrative meal of some of Tom King's work, but the Bryan Hill version of that, right? I'm not going to write like these people, whose work I do admire, but yeah, like, that's what I want to do. And something that's a bit more holistic, where you can sit down, make a cup of coffee or tea, and get a really rich narrative experience from it.
I would love to personally see you do a real straight up horror occult book. Like, take Midnight Suns and take it to the extreme. And I really want to have you bring Blade back with Dr. Voodoo, because they had some history together.
Sure.
Because Dr. Voodoo is a unique character. I mean, he's just so underutilized. He can do everything. He can do a lot of the things that Doctor Strange does, but this is the guy who is the master of the dead, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's so much possibilities there. Have like a Marie Laveau on the team, resurrected, and have, the son of Satan on there, and just a darker version.
It would definitely be something in it's scary. Like, I'm a huge fan of Junji Ito. Ito-san's manga are real strong influences on me. I don't know if you've read Junji Ito's manga work, but it's genuinely chilling. The way that those stories are told. So I would like to bring that to a Blade work, but it would be something that I'd be writing in a bit of a different way, different method of writing. Whereas when you're working a monthly thing, an ongoing thing, for instance, you're kind of writing month to month. You have a general outline, and then you're hitting it that way. I'd want to write like all 4 or 5 of them at once before I turn them in, and to be like, here, like the way I write a screenplay, just like here, right? And then we're looking at this kind of work as a whole, and in finding the exact right artist we need, the exact right cover artist that we need. Like, the back matter having that have a literary quality, like really, like, you know, do something that could deserve a hardcover and really belong on a shelf.
Yeah. To the point about future Blade stories,
yeah.
Jay asked, would there possibly be a future team up with T'Challa and Eric?
Possibly. You know, I don't know if that will happen in Ultimate Black Panther in the near term, mainly because I don't know who is, when you're working on Big Two stuff, getting access to a character can sometimes be difficult and take a lot of time, right? So I don't know how Upstairs would feel about that necessarily. But
do you have more freedom with the Ultimate line because it's not quote unquote the 616 universe?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, Hickman is going to give you space to do what you want to do for sure. But and I don't think there's room for Blade in the story I'm telling there. But yeah, I'd like to see those characters link up for sure, certainly. Hold on 1 second. I'm still here. I'm just gonna. My cat was meowing, so just give me like 10 seconds.
Sure. Let's take a look at some of these other comments we have. Will there be more Blades? I mean, version Killmonger. Thank you all, chat. Hey, shout out to
False Alarm
super chat.
Mr. Hill, can you talk about Fallen Angels? Solicitor is ongoing with the Made in May series. There are stories there. Yeah. Well, with Fallen Angels, I was only ever really doing the miniseries. Like, it wasn't ever really supposed to be more than that. And then Zeb came in there. I honestly just don't think that X-Men readers at the time wanted the experience I was providing for them with that book, by and large. Certain people have had a good experience with it and talked to me about it, but I think, you know, my tone was too dark. I think it was a bit too violent and intense. I think what they wanted was more of the kind of interpersonal aspects of what the X-Men universe was doing at the time. So it was never really meant for me to be there more than the miniseries. And I like what Zeb was able to do with Psylocke afterwards, for sure. Would I write the character? Yeah, I'd like to come back and do a bit with Psylocke for sure. But again, it would be the same sort of thing. Like, if I'm working in Big Two stuff, these days I really would prefer to be able to do, you know, to write it all in one go and turn it in as a book. That then could get initially released as a series of issues, but also be a really strong collected experience.
All right, last Blade question. Will we see Blade deal with the loss of his status as a daywalker, since all vampires can walk during the day now?
Interesting. I will deal with that a bit. I don't think that is something at the front of Blade's mind, that bit of uniqueness. I just don't think it's something that he thinks about in that way. If anything, it perhaps complicates the methodology of hunting vampires. I mean, that's kind of more of where I think he would come from, right? Where, you know, it used to be easier to find them in the day, you know, than it is now. But I don't think he feels like he's lost some kind of uniqueness because of not having the singular daywalker status. You know, it just kind of is what it is for him.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see him deal with the situation by trying to reverse the quote unquote spell that allows them to walk in the daytime, you know?
Yeah.
Just kind of limit their activities.
I think it's more interesting to see vampires who had to fear the sun no longer have to fear it. Yeah. Right? And how that affects them. I'm more interested in how it affects other vampires, necessarily how that affects Blade.
Maybe they'll end up being like, you know, let's just go live in the suburbs and be good people now.
Well, I mean, look, I play with the idea of vampire community a bit in some of my previous Blade work. But again, like, I think that, like, you know, what always bothers me is when someone becomes a vampire, suddenly they just become incredibly simple in their thinking. And I just don't think that would necessarily be the case. You know, like, look, if you have a tendency towards psychopathy, then it's likely going to make you worse. If you're a really good person who's made it into a vampire, you might break because of the way you have to survive, right? But like there's different aspects to the whole thing, and different ways to approach it. There's David in The Lost Boys, and there's Jamie Gertz. They're not the same thing.
All right, so there's another book that you've written, Ultimate Black Panther.
Ultimate Black Panther.
This is the one Marvel book that I look forward to every month.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate
this. This is my number one book. Let's see, it was a year ago since last we spoke on this. Since then, you've done a few things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to recap everything. But the most important thing that you've introduced is this idea of vibranium, first of all, being more than what has been depicted in the 616 universe as being.
Right.
It has a soul. It has consciousness to a degree. And it has an anti-version of it. Can you define for us what this is?
Well, when you're thinking about the ultimate universe, right, one of the things that people would say critically about my initial few issues was, well, it doesn't feel that different than a Black Panther thing. It's all right, but it feels just like a Black Panther thing. And we want to ultimate this up a little bit. And I was thinking to myself, well, I'm going to ultimate it up a little bit, but I need to get there. And one of the things
the crazy part of what you just said, those people that make those comments, did they ever read the original Ultimate Black Panther from back in the day? Because it was terrible.
Well,
I don't want an Ultimate Black Panther in the sense of this is the Ultimate Universe. We would need an Ultimate Black Panther because that Black Panther was mute and he was terrible.
Well, I don't like lose sleep over criticism, but I do engage what people are saying. But I was always thinking, like, well, I'm going to get to it. If it's spiritual thing, I'll answer that question in a moment, Eclectic. So I like to poke at the known knowns. And one of the known knowns is like there's really never been any issue of safety with vibranium.
Right.
We've always just assumed what it was and how you could use it and the rest of it. And I'm like, I'm really interested in what happens when this thing that is the bedrock of your kingdom and your legacy, you realize is a thing that might be incredibly dangerous.
Eclectic Birdie equates it to the Final Fantasy Spirits Within film.
A bit, a bit certainly, right? Like, and thinking to the alchemical aspects of gold and the idea of it being gold's a very strange thing, right? If you research gold, it's very weird because it can do things a lot of things can't do, and that's always fascinated me. Their moldavite is a really interesting thing because it's kind of listed as a mineral, but it's not a mineral. It's a tektite. Moldavite doesn't naturally occur on Earth. It comes from like comets that hit Earth, right? But it's not from Earth, but it is on Earth. And I always thought like moldavite was really interesting and has a lot of occult ideas with it. And so I wanted to play with that and T'Challa's legacy in that and how that affects the spiritualism and their relationship to their gods and have this kind of thing unfold a little bit. And so yeah, there's vibranium is clearly so far in the story. It seemingly is almost like an antenna for a consciousness. A very old consciousness, that has its own will and its own desire and its own relationship to prophecy. And as the story continues, we're going to see, how aspects of the Voodoo Khan, align or misalign with that. How that affects what T'Challa understands is the Black Panther. How that affects Wakanda. How Wakanda will go forward, how Eric is going to deal with the realization of this and the potentiality of it, how Aurora is going to deal with it, right? Everyone's going to sort of bounce around it. And I suppose that's I was a Frank Herbert kid growing up. I was sort of obsessed with Dune and the Spice Melange and the rest of it. So there's aspects of that kind of in there too. But there's something really interesting to me about the thing that you've kind of run your kingdom on is a thing that could indeed be a threat, or at least the vessel of a threat.
Yeah. You, in your earlier portion of the run, made some allusions to the fact that there was a traitor within Wakanda.
Yeah.
Is that a storyline we're ever going to figure out who that traitor is?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Like, everything that I've kind of presented, I'm going to reconcile as we continue on in the narrative. I mean, we kind of had like a bit of like a red herring version of that, but it wasn't a full payoff of that. So yeah, so all these things, Child of Light, all these things, we're gonna start reconciling some of these things as we're in the second phase.
Child of Light was going to be my next question. Is that to be reconciled? All right.
Sure.
So we talked a bit about vibranium and how it could potentially be more of a menace than people realize. But then there's this other aspect, this other substance. Is it anti-vibranium? What do you call this other substance that T'Challa is?
Well, everything, I look at sort of the universe in terms of everything exists in opposites, right? And so vibranium has this opposite that they're calling dark vibranium, and the dark vibranium seemingly has a stronger connection to whatever this consciousness is, but this consciousness also seemingly is able to control normal vibranium too, right? So like, what is this whole thing? So, the idea is that there's this thing, like in every mythology, you get the polemics, you get the as above, so below, right? You get this idea of opposites. And I really like the idea of when vibranium landed, there were two forms. And one was doing a thing that was a bit more dangerous, but potentially more powerful and needed to be hidden away. And the other was powerful, but less powerful than the reckless element, but easier to control.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you could bury the secrets and keep the benefit, but wanted to have these things sort of bubble up over the course of the Black Panther story and have T'Challa need to deal with this and really have it have like continent spanning consequence, within the story, like to really be able to, get our character dynamics in place, build some things, and then explode this thing into a very large kind of epic tale.
I like the fact that you phrase it as dark vibranium. So they're both vibranium. They're just on different polarities, basically.
Yeah. And without giving anything away, the idea is, well, if there is a consciousness, what did it want? Why is it here? Did what we build serve it, or did what we build offend it? And what is my own blood lineage role in all of this, right? The most interesting thing that I think a king can go through is a creeping understanding that they may never have been in control of their own fate.
Yeah, a humbling.
Right? So we're dealing with all that stuff going forward.
God Mystic Visions says, that reminds me, in some of the OG comics, T'Challa had panther eyes and fangs. Was the vibranium mutation in Ultimate Black Panther a nod to that classic feature of his? That was during the Volume 2 4-issue run done by Dennis Cowan, who was the first one to give T'Challa that look.
Dennis is kind of always an influence on me. And in that dream sequence, it's so if you read the Encyclopedia of Witches and Witchcraft, there's a section in it about mask wearing and about how the mask serves two purposes. The first purpose is to disguise the identity of the wearer. The second purpose is to evoke specific aspects of the wearer, to to put these things in their nature forward, right? So one of the other things I want to explore is kind of Mother Bast in this incarnation of the Black Panther universe. What that spirit form could represent, what savagery, primality, what predatory aspects are live within T'Challa. So a lot of that is sort of symbolic, right? A lot of that is imagery speaking to certain things. Again, repression, expression about his nature that I feel like we can get into. And because T'Challa, in so many stories, he's so safe. He's good and righteous and makes the right choices. And I wanted to make him a little less safe. One of the things I really like about Paul Atreides is how Paul Atreides is kind of a dangerous figure. And Herbert takes him into some fairly dark places.
The Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah, the Kwisatz Haderach, as that story, goes on in its volumes. And yeah, I just kind of, I think T'Challa is a man who outwardly presents very much in control, but in truth is very much out of control. And I think Eric is a guy who outwardly presents less control, but inwardly has more control of the things inside T'Challa that he hasn't fully reconciled with.
That's an interesting duality there in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Given that you are not afraid of giving, a character like Blade the ability to change into other animals, what have you, is this like a foreshadowing of an ultimate Black Panther power? Will he be able to turn into a were-panther?
Well, I can't speak specifically to that because I don't want to set up expectation or deny anything sort of outright. I will say, if he were to develop abilities, it would not be the same way that Blade does it, right? It would come through a relationship to something spiritual, right? Because the other aspect is, where is Mother Bast in all?
I was literally about to say that.
Right? Where is her voice in these affairs? But that's why we have a Sorcerer Supreme here. That's why we have other characters. So there are other things at foot. So I will explore a deeper union between Eric and some of the spiritual origins of Black Panther, especially as he's going to be becoming more and more face to face with this seemingly almost interdimensional, intergalactic thing.
Interdimensional, intergalactic thing.
Speaking to the aspects of Dark Vibranium and where, what is channeling through it and how all this is going.
Okay. I was questioning where
does the voice come from, right?
Yeah,
is a question, right? So, yeah.
All right.
People should take a look at my Killmonger series if they want a sense of how I approach some of these thematics. Even though that's in the 616 and this isn't, you should still take a look at that if you're kind of interested in the things I'm talking about. I think you get a bit more of an idea of how I approach these things.
I can't imagine that we haven't talked about Killmonger yet. We'll have to bring you back to talk about that because that was a fantastic series. But one of the most important aspects of you bringing in your Killmonger run, and this is just indicative of you being a great writer, is you address something that I always questioned when I read Jungle Action originally, which was, how is it that a heart-shaped herb-powered Black Panther was able to be defeated so easily by Eric Killmonger, who has no powers. And you explain in that series that he actually did have powers. He got a power boost from Kaluna. And so God Visions asked, will it be bringing Kaluna in this run, and what initially inspired Killaluna anyway?
Well, perhaps to the first question. To the second question, Killmonger in that story was very much the Bishop of Outcasts. right? There's almost a Goldilocks aspect to the character where like this porridge is too hot, this porridge is too cold. Finding the porridge is just right, in terms of where he belongs. And I felt like if he were to be approached by deity, it would be another outcast deity, right? It would be a person on a cosmic level, an entity on a cosmic level that feels just as ostracized and exiled as he feels, and he can bond with that, right? And it's the polar opposite of what we can look at with Wakanda and T'Challa and Mother Bass and all that. That's almost like the elitist pantheon that he's part of. But just as T'Challa could have his opposite, Mother Bass could have hers.
Yeah. And
that's where that came from.
God Visions also asks, are we going to get a backstory of how Killmonger and Aurora became an item?
Good question. I'm not going to do a fully like illustrated sort of flashback of the thing, mainly because I think that you should be able to kind of glean that in their ongoing behavior, and rather than like kind of breaking into flashback to just put a finer point on all of those things. I think you're going to see very clearly why they are together, but you're also, I think, going to see very clearly what remains distant from them in their relationship, in their bonding. Same thing with T'Challa, and his relationships. I think in a lot of ways, you've got two couples that are there for either tradition or convenience. That might not be there out of pure romantic purpose.
Which leads to our next couple question. Why does Storm dislike T'Challa? Does she secretly like him?
She dislikes him because he represents grounding to a person that's convinced themselves that they roam. And his existence, Wakanda, its structure challenges her in a lot of key ways. Eric's admiration of T'Challa also kind of challenges her in some ways. Now, does she like him? There's probably aspects of him that she finds appealing, that she's kind of dealing with. How much will she deal with it? We will have to see. But we're going to do some interesting things with Aurora and T'Challa as the story goes on. I just finished because I'm ahead, so I just finished an issue that kind of gets into that.
Which issue will you get into that?
Oh,
do you know which issue number that is? You're on 14 now, I think.
I think it starts in 17. I think it starts in 17, and then we'll come to a 4 very quickly. Does Okoye love T'Challa? Yes. Is it like a passionate romantic love? Generally among royalty, it's not.
Yeah.
Right? Generally among royalty, it's not. So, and if you notice the way I've characterized them, they have a deep trust between them and a deep bond between them. But I'm not sure these are two people that would have fallen in love had it not been for who they
were. We got another super chat. Thank you, Fool Ass Earthman. He asked, would you ever consider putting Salamander Cruel in a story?
Sure, I consider it, yeah. It's always about whether or not I think I can do something really interesting with the character and make it work. I'd have to get a bit more familiar. I'm only kind of like in passing, with that character. I'd have to get into the marrow of them. But yeah, could definitely be cool, for sure.
Thank you for the super chat, sir. All right.
Thank you for the super chat. Yes.
You mentioned you have some things in store for Eric.
Oh yeah,
So that T'Challa ultimately says, "Hey, why don't you be my general?"
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the fans can expect from Eric? Because right now, Eric's kind of cool. Like, he seems a pretty steady guy, reliable.
Well, getting into, again, like the ultimate idea of everything, right? The kind of the umbrella under which I'm working. I think approaching Eric in the story like a ticking time bomb for betrayal of T'Challa, I think is less interesting.
Yeah.
Honestly. Not to say that there won't ever be conflict with them, not to say that they won't try to kill each other or they'll never fight. Like, I'm not going to kind of give away the farm on that. But I think it's wise to take Eric in the series at face value. I think you're seeing a man arc in real time. And I think where he goes will feel very organic to the story I'm telling. But I don't feel like I have a gravitational pull to have them fight to death on a cliff. I don't. There's places you can get that. So that's one place where I am a little ultimate-y about it, right? Where I'm just like, that doesn't necessarily have to be how these characters resolve. Not to say they won't have deep conflict. Not to say they won't have each a different relationship to Wakanda itself, right? Like, what happens when an outcast is given authority?
Right.
Right? Like, so we've got a really interesting tapestry now, I feel, to do some really cool things with these characters that explore undiscovered territory, but still, we might still see versions of things we've seen before. I would say that I would only be interested in having Eric fight T'Challa if it was very unclear who you should root for. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. You made T'Challa have make Eric general of his armies. Where does that place him in the hierarchy? Is he, in terms of, say, Okoye and Shuri, do they answer to him, or vice versa?
Currently, Okoye would be kind of a governing maternal voice in the room, in T'Challa's absence. Eric is a bit of a man-at-arms, right? But I think ultimately he would serve at the will of the Queen, rather than them kind of following his lead. It's really about how much does Okoye value his counsel? How much does Okoye value Eric's presence? How does Shuri feel about Eric's presence, right? Like, these are things that I'm going to explore a little bit. And in T'Challa's absence, were a crisis to strike, whose voice in that room is the voice that has followed? And why?
Right, that's the question.
Right. And so I think Okoye is ultimately the decider.
Okay.
However, the way she decides could be more diplomatic than Screed, right? It could be more democratic. So like, those are the things that I'm going to deal with.
Okay. You have Killmonger and Storm introduced this new character, Anon, your version of the Sorcerer Supreme. She is not a ultimate Doctor Strange, is she?
No.
Or is she her own separate character, right?
She's her own separate character.
Is she based on anything from the 616, or is she an original character?
Completely original character.
Okay. I love this exchange between T'Challa and Anon. This is a great, great, great scene. She talks about her theories on what vibranium is, but in that exchange, there's also a discussion about, you need to trust. Trust is a common theme in your story. But between T'Challa talking about, or Anon talking about, you need to trust me, King, and the Vodou Khan, Amala is discussing with T'Challa, you need to trust me, King. Like he's constantly having people tell him, "You have to trust me," and he's constantly doubting the people around him. Why is that such a central theme?
I think when you are a ruler, it is very difficult to trust any of the forces around you. I mean, the series begins really about him having a lack of trust in the Voodoo Khan, right? There's a betrayer somewhere in the kingdom, the death of his father, like all these other things that are happening, right? And he's isolated in a lot of ways. And so as a ruler, choosing who to trust and why to trust and what to trust in, which is why I'm questioning the nature of vibranium, right? Those are all things that I want to play with. And to have this usurper who is not a Wakandan, who couldn't be more different than a Wakandan, come in with both great power and straight talk, then I thought, like, yeah, that's interesting to have in there. And watching T'Challa have to kind of build who he's going to build in this council around him that he can be totally honest with about what he's going through, what he fears, and what he's realizing he's got to try to stop.
Yeah. So then she talks about vibranium remembers, it has a soul, it has a consciousness, and she brings it to the fore. This entity that's created, that she brings out of this chunk of vibranium, is this a collective entity of vibranium or just out of this one piece? It sounds like kind of a silly question, but if you were to take more pieces of vibranium, could she do the same thing and bring out more entities?
I would think about vibranium a bit like it may serve as a kind of gateway.
Oh, okay.
And she was able to pull the thing closest to the gateway out, right? And so that's sort of what we're looking at here.
So he's not vibranium man. He is something that is brought out.
Right. It's something come through.
Gotcha. All right. Somebody asked a question. Will gentle vibranium mutant appear ultimately? Thank you for super bad common sense.
Perhaps for sure. Yeah. I thought about it. I've definitely thought about it. It's, I've got enough of these own characters that I want to sort of deal with, so I have to be very kind of judicious about character space, but I've certainly considered it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, given the way the role that you've had vibranium play in this series, it'd be interesting to see a man that is covered in vibranium and what that entails. So,
for sure, but it's definitely been a consideration. Yeah.
One of the questions someone has asked, I saw it somewhere in here. Why is his mask open in the front?
That was one of the designs that like Stefano came up with, and what I liked about it was it just gives him more opportunity for dramatic expression in the images. Yeah, which I appreciated. And Stefano was really into the design, and I was like, yeah, let's just go with it.
So Stefano came up with it. All right. All right. So you have Storm do some interesting things with her power. She basically creates like a circuit, like you learn when you're in elementary school about science. So you spin the top and generate energy. Are we going to be seeing some more? Because one of the things that Killmonger says is there's a lot of things that she can do that you don't know of. Are we going to see that in the short order, the expansion of her powers?
Well, one of the things that you see me doing is I'm bringing in antagonists that have great power.
Yeah.
Right. And so that allows me to have an arena of kind of bigger canvas superhero action. Right. So if like the first half of the series is, kind of hand-to-hand combat, sort of like some of the things we see, now we're getting into things that are a bit grander. and bigger in scale, and we're able to kind of unleash her in a lot of ways. So we'll be seeing, but she's still rough around the edges. I mean, this is not a Storm that has been. Ororo has not yet been trained to really finesse what she can do, right? It's still very much barely controlled chaos.
Yeah. All right. You end this issue with the concept that Wakanda needs an exorcism.
Mm-hmm.
How do you exorcise vibranium out of metal, or the demon in vibranium out of a substance that's throughout all of Wakanda?
Well, that's the question, right? Is how do you exercise whatever the bond is to this dark consciousness, the consciousness itself? Is it a series of dark consciousnesses? Is it a civilization, scraping at the door? Whatever. How do you exercise the threat out of Wakanda? And I don't think Einan has, at the moment she speaks, a plan, but she has a necessary goal. And so part of where we're headed into the series is, how do we do this? How do we solve this issue? And then you're going to see that there are other forces that don't perhaps want the issue to be solved.
Yeah. Now, you introduced this character in your latest issue,
mm-hmm.
Adi.
Mm-hmm.
And in such a dramatic fashion, this dude I don't know who this guy is. There's not really much exposition. He's just in there. He's slaying dudes left and right. He's being a complete badass. I'm like, did he just introduce, like, I don't know, Ultimate Frank Castle or Ultimate Falcon, or I don't know who this guy is. And then you unceremoniously have him absorbed into our vibranium guy.
Mm-hmm.
Who, in your mind, who was this guy prior to him being zapped?
Oh, I don't think he's not symbolic of some other Marvel character that I'm playing with. What I really wanted to do was, again, like I always want the real world to be happening at the same time the comic book stuff is happening. And I think so many times I'm reading comics and I'm just in the world of the superheroes, and like there's no other geopolitical forces at work. There's nothing going on. And so I wanted to just bring in a kind of militaristic aspect of, Nigeria, essentially, in the world through these characters, and then have, this, whomever I reveal this thing to be, kind of bond with that character, and then we'll see, where that goes from there.
All right. I feel something bad's going to happen out of T'Challa making Killmonger his general. It just seems like epic foreshadowing.
Well,
but
it's it's certainly you're certainly taking dry twigs and pouring gasoline on them, right? And so we'll see where that goes. I would expect there will be consequence for the decision that he's making, for sure. I don't want to get into the details of it. How long is the series? I'm not sure. I'm just kind of continuing to go, so I'm not really sure.
It's just this line here. Okoye will help you, Eric. Shuri is too rash. You're dubious of everything, but you also have control of your emotions. So he's kind of criticizing his sister. He's leaving. Shuri's the next in line. She'd be the next sort of rational person that you would think he would entrust the country to, right? Mm-hmm. But he's like, my sister's too, rash. She's a hothead.
Right.
Well, I get the feeling that's going to be an issue.
He's got Okoye there, to kind of mind the store. Shuri likes activity in this universe.
She about that action.
She likes to strike first, right? She's a personal doctrine. And he's seen Eric be a little more measured in how he's responding to things. And I think he sees something really potentially great in Eric. I think he respects him for being able to survive the way he has and do the things that he does. And so it's coming from a genuine place, right? But ultimately, he does have a Koye that's there, and she is not a silent queen. She's not an ineffectual queen. So, she is a bit of the stabilizing force that he thinks allows, Eric to, be part of that round table and see where that goes. But
is your Shuri based on the Reginald Hudlin original version of Shuri, who was this hot-headed warrior type?
It's somewhat influenced by Reggie's work for sure. I think it's just, but also kind of when you've got this brother and sister, I wanted them to have distinctly different points of view. Mm-hmm. So they weren't just like, a male or female version of the other, like where there was something a little bit different. And one of the things about people who spend their time creating technology, especially weapons, is they also really like to see their application.
Yeah.
So yeah, that just felt like a natural place to put her. But like Reggie's work for sure is something I read for and saw some of the things he was doing there.
Yeah. Shout out to your artist. You are blessed with having Stefano Caselli, who's just one of the best comic book artists in the world, in my opinion. But then you had a fill-in guy, Chris Nieto, and it's almost a slap in the face to call him a fill-in guy, because his art is so good that it's almost seamless a transition. Sometimes when you have another artist working on the book or helping out with an issue here and there, the disparity in the art styles is such that it can be very jarring to the reader. And it is a seamless move from Stefano's to Chris Nieto's artwork. And I've never heard
for sure
of Chris Nieto before this series.
Oh, he's great. And look, Marvel treats me very well with the artists that I tend to work with. So yeah, look, it's super humbling to have these guys working on your stuff. Whenever images come back to me from a script I wrote, I'm always really humbled by it, because it's always cool and surprising and interesting in ways I couldn't expect. So, I do look at comics still as kind of vehicles for the visual storytelling. More so than paying attention to the writer necessarily. I think the writer is there to kind of organize the effort with a narrative, but the experience is rooted within visual storytelling, and these guys are both great visual storytellers.
Shout out to Taylor Love with the super chat. She asked, "How long is this series?"
Oh yeah, I thought I spoke to that. I don't think I have a certain end date. I'm going on for a bit. I'll say I'm going on for a bit. So we've got a good stretch of narrative left.
Good. Kanan White gives high praise. The art is super solid. For him to say that's legit.
Yeah, I mean, the guys, they're good, right? When they're good, they're good.
Just as an aside, I'd love to see Kanan White and you on a Blade series. That'd be awesome.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I just, again, like, that's why I want to be a bit more specific and directed about things. So I can be like building teams and that sort of deal around books. I have, usually I just kind of like, oh, I get that person, great. But, going forward, I want to be a bit more proactive in terms of, just what my thing with an artist is always, what do you like to do? What do you dislike doing? So I don't give you a story you don't want to tell, right? Because it's weird. The relationship between like the writer and the art team in comics is very strange, right? Because it's like the art team is the DP, but they're also the actors. And you're the writer, but you're also the editor. But the art team is sort of directing, definitely shooting it. so it's a bit of a shared responsibility, and with any artistic collaborator, I always like to know what they get excited about doing and try to root the storytelling around that. And so I try to find a story that I want to tell that links up and intersects with someone's real interest in telling a story, either in that world or with these elements or, what have you.
Do you have to check in with Hickman on stuff that you want to do?
I assume that Jonathan is aware of the things that I'm doing, and if he had an issue, he would mail it down to me, but he hasn't.
Okay. So you introduced this new suit, or a new old suit. How old is this suit?
Oh, I mean, I would say it's definitely a pre-tech suit, right? It's definitely kind of going acoustic, like I say in the book. I'd probably say it's a good
grandfather, great-grandfather?
150, 200 years, maybe.
Oh, 200, that far back. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's a little Assassin's Creed, right?
All right. And by the way, you mentioned his relationship with Bast. This is the first time I've seen him pray to Bast in this issue. We're going to see more of that in the future to explore that relationship more.
I think we have to. Because, to me, we need to get into, like, what are the... I will say this, that it will take a deeper exploration of the origins of the Black Panther to confront and resolve the antagonists of the series.
You have a lot of threads that are interesting. We have this temple where we found, with all the inscriptions on it, it seems to be almost alien inscriptions on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the anti-vibranium found there, and a lot of interesting threads to follow on. So I'm fascinated.
Well, they're and they're all kind of coming towards a point, right? Like I would say, rather than like different threads, it's almost like I've just sort of like shown you different aspects of the narrative that are all going to kind of align towards a thing, in especially the stuff that I'm writing currently. Leading up to what I'm hoping is a really kind of epic, reckoning of all these things.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen that. You did a tweet recently where you addressed someone's criticism of the pacing of the book. I think these last two issues really picked up the pace a lot, particularly issue 13. You had a lot of action in that one.
Yeah, I mean,
what do you say when people give you that criticism about the pacing of the book?
Well, I understand. Like, people spend their money on this stuff, and they certainly like, to get the kind of visceral payoff of things, issue by issue. But with something like this, I need to set the stage a little bit to make the violence mean something, right? Like, you want the action sequences to have meaning and emotional weight, and so I've got to build these characters up a little bit, build the relationships up a little bit to be able to now cash in all that stuff. And so I think in the second half of the storytelling, now I can sort of cash in these chips, right? Like, I've built this credit that I can now spend. Is how I look at the work in Black Panther, as opposed to Blade, which is something that I think we're kind of going in with this idea of a certain kind of kineticism, right? So someone could read that and be like, man, he was kind of like, killing everything every issue. And I was like, well, yeah, because that's a different experience. But with this, there's a world that I have to build a little, and make sure that the action when it's present has significance. But being said, it's a lot more kinetic from here on out, right? It's certainly getting more and more kinetic as we go.
Did Hickman give you a guide on how the story's supposed to go, or is the idea of the story 100% your idea?
Oh, initially, he certainly had, the world building that he had done. When it comes to the actual, like, beating of it all out, it's mostly like me, really. It's I don't feel like he's certainly not like, you got to do this, right? Mainly because there's so many different kind of ultimate worlds I think he's managing right now. And once the broad kind of stroke movements of what I was doing sort of went through and got approval, largely I'm allowed to tell the story the way that I would like to tell the story.
Are we going to get more of an exploration as to the mystical side of Wakanda? Because back in the jungle action days, there was a whole mystical side that was explored at one point, and I think a lot of subsequent iterations of Black Panther in the 616 universe that really hasn't been touched upon. You've really blown that up significantly with the idea of the Vodou Khan. Is this something that go into deeper?
I think because we're dealing with an antagonist now that has clearly some metaphysical aspects.
Yeah.
We're going to have to find at least some sort of metaphysical response, right? Which I think will allow me to elucidate more on some of those things that you're talking about. I don't feel the need to resolve everything to a fine point, as I do the thing. I think the big things I need to resolve, but some of the stuff I'm establishing and it's there for exploration. But I do think that in order to save his kingdom, T'Challa is going to have to leave his tether to the rational a little bit and embrace more of the irrational. And it's one thing to pray to a statue thinking that perhaps the god can hear. And it's another thing to talk to it. Right? So that's the kind of thing that he's dealing with. It's you're up against something that in order for you to stop, you're going to have a certain amount of humility to what you are able to accept and understand. And you're going to have to, go to some irrational places to fight something that seemingly has irrational power.
You introduced this character, the American.
Yeah.
Is she an original character? Because you only introduced her as the American. You haven't given her name yet.
Yeah.
Will she be revealed as being a character that we've already known from the 616 universe? This is
no. This is an original character.
Original character. Okay. I was going to say maybe she's Val Cooper or something like that.
No.
All right. Look, everyone who's here, please, if you haven't already, like the video, share the video, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the Black Comic Lords. Producer, do we have any Black Panther questions left? Because we want to move on to the last aspect of this. Are we going to see some new Wakandan heroes, mutants in your series?
We're going to see some new Wakandan heroes, mutants in my series. To that, I will say perhaps.
200-year-old no-tech suit. So he's bringing like Energy Dagger and Chameleon cards, right? Because Doom and Iron Lad don't need any vibranium for super cool tech.
There's the era in which that suit was created wasn't without its craft, right? Wasn't without its technique. I wanted to kind of approach what is like the Edo Shinobi era of Black Panther, basically. And so that's a little bit of what the influence is there.
Will we see any additional tribes like the hyena or cults like the crocodile and lion appear? That's a good question.
Perhaps.
That'd be dope, actually.
Perhaps. One of the things that I want to do is I never want to put things in a story just to kind of put them in a story and check a box, right? So I always want to make sure that I deal with it in an emotionally resonant way, or I just don't feel like I have the time to deal with it. And when it comes to Afrofuturism, one of the things that, because I'll be honest, I'm not natively a huge fan of Afrofuturism in general, because a lot of it I find is broad, but not particularly emotional. There's a billion sects and tribes and things and cosmic things and other things, but I'm always kind of looking for where's the emotional story in all of this? How can I follow this, right? And so if I deal with something that expands the universe, I want to be able to wrestle with it in a really emotional way. So it's not, if you see me omitting a thing or not doing a thing, it's not because I dislike it. It's because I just need the time and space to serve it well.
Are you going to give T'Challa any powers that we haven't seen before?
Perhaps.
Yeah. What inspired Hill's current version of Killmonger and Ultimate Black Panther versus choices he made with his Killmonger run years ago?
Oh. Well, I mean, they're different things, right? I mean, you know, the Killmonger I was writing years ago was sort of rooted in more of the classical aspects of who we think Eric Killmonger is. And that was, you know, a story about a guy kind of suffering the slings and arrows of what it's like trying to find your place in the West when the West doesn't want you, right? And in a lot of ways. So he was definitely less purposeful than this Eric is, right? Like he was definitely more of a mercenary in spirit than this Eric is, who, you know, Ultimate Black Panther Eric, I think has principle. And I think he has a certain righteousness about him, which can be equally as dangerous. But sort of two very different characters in a way. And in Hickman's build of the 616, I mean of the Ultimate Universe, we don't really have the same kind of national, international geopolitics that we have in our world necessarily. And a lot of what Eric's character was going through in my original miniseries was based very much in like our sociology, our America, our historical conflicts. And I don't think they're as omnipresent in the world that Hickman is building. So to have Killmonger be of that in the same way didn't feel organic and genuine.
All right. Let's see. Will we? No, we saw that already. What was the other question? Dr. Wizard. Is there any King of the Dead powers he may have in the future or access to those types of powers like necromancy?
I don't think I should take him that far. And well, at least like not this early in the narrative. You know, I mean, maybe I could explore that. But I think he'd have to come to that in a slower way. Almost I would need an entire story arc kind of about that, because you're really challenging, you know, your ideas about mortality and consciousness and the rest of it. I'd want to deal with those things in a real way.
All right, let's just do two more questions here.
Sure.
Can we expect to see ultimate versions of Black Panther villains like Madam Slay? Madam Slay.
Yeah, maybe.
Madam Slay would be interesting to see an ultimate version of. What else we got? One last one. Throw in one more question. Will Storm from Ultimate Black Panther be aware that May Storm is doing in Ultimate X-Men? I read issue 14. May Storm liberated the former cult of the Atom member and expand her X-Men.
Oh, I don't know. You know, she's got her own things going on. So it's definitely not going to be a major part of what I'm doing. You know, it might drift into the story, but right now the stakes are pretty high for what she's doing right now. So she's kind of focused on where she is and what she's doing.
All right. So switching gears, switching companies, actually, from the marvelous world of Marvel to the distinguished competition, you have a new book coming out. The Rise of the Power Company. You have the recharged version of this book. This book came out a few months ago and left with a bit of a cliffhanger, which is leading to your series, the recharged version. What's interesting about this, DC has never had a black super team that I know of. And I wasn't raised a DC guy. I was more of a Marvel guy. But in my recollection, I have not seen a black superhero team in the DC Prime universe. I'm not counting Milestone. Milestone's its own thing. The closest we had was the book that came out a year or two ago, the Titans Beast Wars, a Waller Rising book. But that wasn't a team as much as a group of black heroes that came together for a particular mission. They didn't have a name.
Sure.
Yours is the first actual team that I know of. Do you know if that's accurate? Is that something anyone ever brought up to you at DC?
Well, DC never brought it up to me, and I hadn't really considered it when it came my way. But I suppose that's accurate, right? Like, I guess there hasn't really been one, right? I know Brandon Thomas well, and I like him very much, and and he was architecting something over there, and then they reached out to me about doing this one shot, and I initially wasn't interested, to be honest. I hold Brandon's work in really high esteem. I just didn't see like where I fit in with this, really. What can I do with it that would be interesting and I think worth people's time. But then when I was able to kind of bring it a little bit more into a psychological place, especially when it comes to like Jace, his relationship to both being Batman and then these other characters and all that started to intrigue me more. And then I decided that I could bring something to it, right? Like it's just to be totally honest, there's always that inner debate that goes on. It's like, do you want to be the black solution to black characters in comics?
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, well, there's a black character, so put Bryan's on the list of guys that write black people. And so we'll just get him, to do the thing. And I never want to be pigeonholed in that way, really. So initially I was like, are you just coming to me because I'm black? And I might be available because these are just black characters, but there's nothing really to explore there for me to do it. But then once I got some space to explore some things I wanted to explore, then I was like, okay, well, this feels like something I can bring something to.
It was interesting because I understand that struggle as a creator. You don't want to be pigeonholed into, only getting one type of job because that limits what you can do. It's interesting your particular take when you ask, why Bryan Hill on this book? And I think the best way to answer that question is to look at your resume and specifically look at what you did on The Outsiders.
Sure.
Because The Outsiders was a team in large part led by Batman and Black Lightning, Black Lightning specifically. And you've got both of those characters here, although you have a different type of Batman. And I was fortunate enough to be able to read an advanced copy of this. Your story really has a lot about this Batman, and you explore who he is in ways that have not really been fully explored in his prior runs, which is interesting.
Well, to me, I feel like a lot of thoughtful work has been done about him being a black man who was Batman.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I needed to do that.
And you didn't.
I felt like we've been there.
Yeah.
Right. What I wanted to do was explore Jace Fox's relationship to being Batman. Because he didn't fall into a well with bats in it. A bat didn't fly through his window when he was badly beaten trying to beat guys up in a ski mask, right? He doesn't really have a native trauma-based connection to being a bat. In a lot of ways, Batman is Bruce Wayne's personal nightmare, right? He's wearing his own nightmare because he knows it's effective.
Yeah.
And how do you inherit that in an effective way? how do you manifest that? I mean, Jace has a completely different relationship to violence than Bruce has. A completely different backstory. And he's mapping himself into someone else's trauma, essentially, right? Someone else's trauma thought form, the trauma tulpa that Batman is. That was interesting to me. And then the idea of, while he's trying to get comfortable in the idea of being Batman, now he's being brought onto a team.
Yeah.
And I've always been one of those people that kind of questions whether or not Batman should really be part of teams. I'm a bit of one of those frustrating Batman purists. Any Batman. And I think Batman works with people, but always maintains his own space. So I was interested in building these conflicts out a little bit, like this idea of how is Jace essentially coming into his own in at least this little story I'm telling, and how does that affect his relationship with Josiah Power and all of this? Like I thought was fun to play with on an organic level, right? Like the kind of the hyper branding of the Power Company, because my name is Josiah Power. If I'm Jace Fox, I'm like, okay, well, that's a little silly. But
I think you literally have him say that in the book, dude.
right.
When he's like, "Hey, I'm Josiah Power. Here's my card," and he's like, "Yeah, that's a bit on brand, is it not? It's a bit on the nose." So I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial.
Oh, let's do it.
I think. How do I say this without getting in trouble? I think your question of what is when Jace Fox is exploring the question of why is it that I'm Batman? Mm-hmm. Why am I wearing somebody else's suit? Why am I wearing someone else's trauma and motivation to be this guy who trashes things in the night? Mm-hmm. I think if you are afforded the opportunity and the inclination to continue this series, there's what, in my personal opinion, this is just my personal opinion, I think you have him explore that and he reaches an inevitable conclusion, which is something someone just asked in here. Common sense. He says, is Orpheus still alive? No, Orpheus is dead. Orpheus died a while ago, unceremoniously, as Eric Battle pointed out. But that was a character who should rise again. And I personally think Jace Fox is doing himself a disservice being Batman. I think I would love him take on the mantle of Orpheus. He can do everything that he's doing now without having the weight of, as you phrased it, someone else's trauma, that mask of someone else, you know?
Well,
and
it all depends on kind of how you approach the idea, the concept of Batman. And I approach it very much from a psychological place. And part of what Bruce was doing was he needed to be more than a man. That's the whole point of being Batman. And so for me, the thing that Jace would be least interested in publicly exploring is the black version of Batman.
Yeah.
Because that's reductive. Because then he's no longer a legend. He's just a guy dressed up as a bat that has more rules than the people he's fighting. Right? So were I to explore Jace, it would really have to like take him through the stations of the bat to really understand how to do this. And to also deal with what happens when you wear that. What happens to the city you're in when you wear this and you bring the things out that brings out in people, right? Because you're wearing Bruce's trauma, but you're also kind of wearing his curse.
And his attitude, like if you were to color this character on the page or watch or read this in black and white, you would not know this is Jace Fox. You would think it's Bruce Wayne. In the way that he relates to a lot of these other characters, the aloofness, the standoffishness,
I think that comes kind of part and parcel with, I mean, for me, just organic. It's like, well, I gotta act like Batman.
Yeah.
Right? Like you know, like I'm not Bruce. It's obvious I'm not Bruce, but I gotta act like Batman. This is what Batman would do. And I do think that part of him, not that he has imposter syndrome, but I'm not sure he can ever be fully his own guy while trying to do that, right? Like, I think there's an aspect of it. But he does have some things in common with Batman in terms of methodology. I think he is a very sharp guy psychologically. I think he does have an antenna to kind of put things together in a forensic way. I think he's got an ability to understand the dark side of human motivation in his own way. But it's different. You know, it's not Bruce, but it's different, right? So I think there's a struggle, and I think that's to me is what makes him potentially really interesting, is the struggle of all of that.
It's also interesting seeing how he relates to the Signal. This relationship was established in this DC Power book. It's interesting seeing them react as kind of like the quote unquote this other version of Batman and Robin, because they are very different. There are personality differences between Duke Thomas and like a Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne and Jace Fox. They're different people, and so you have these guys with these mantles on, but the way they interact and their personalities are distinctly different.
Well, and and again, like, I'm kind of a constructionist, right? I'm a purist. I think you reduce these characters by having them interact in too many common ways. I've never been a big fan of superheroes standing and chatting in a room when they're in a book. Like, I think it's a little it just reduces them to a thing. And I like the grandeur of comics. I like the operatic aspects of it, especially with something like Batman. And so, like, to me, there's a natural static of, like, you know, Jason's kind of coming in and being like, dude, I'm not gonna, like, be a chummy guy with you in the team. Like, that's not my role here. I'm here to catch a psychopath because I was asked to come.
The other member of this team is Vixen, who is, I mean, shout out to the roster on this. I mean, you've got a bunch of characters I actually genuinely like on this team, and ones that I always clamor for every month. I'm like, I wish DC would make some more books with these characters. Vixen's a really dope character. Vixen's my favorite super heroine at DC Comics. It's interesting seeing her interact with Jace Fox because she's been on the Justice League. She's been, you know, with Batman. She knows Batman, and she treats Jace Fox like, dude, you're not scaring me with the whole, you know, you're doing the voice thing that Batman does. Like, you're not fooling anybody. Like, get over yourself. You're not. It's not. She's not disrespectful to him, but she's not afraid of him. In the way that Batman sort of makes people uneasy, she doesn't feel uneasy with Jace Fox.
Well, look, some women have a very good ability to just suss out BS.
Yeah.
Right? They can just feel when you're putting on airs. And part of Jace is putting on airs.
Right.
You know? Part of it isn't really genuine. He's still trying to figure it out. Right? And when Duke isn't going to confront him about those things, because he in his own way understands that it's hard to have this symbol on your chest. It's hard for me to have this symbol on my chest, and I'm not even dressed up like a bat. You know, like, he's trying to be a Batman. So it's going to be a bumpy road a little bit, right? As he figures it out, because Duke's got a different relationship to that legacy, to Bruce and the rest of it. Vixen is more just like, dude, like, I'm never going to look at you the way I look at him.
We have super chat here from Common Sense. Can you talk more about Duke Thomas? As I wish DC pushes him more. Two of friends from We Are Robin are now his rivals. Daryl is first. Mr. Bloom and his mom is in his mom.
Yeah, well, I like Duke. I spent time with him in Batman and the Outsiders. My controversial opinion is that there's no reason for him to have a bat on his chest.
I agree.
That's my controversial opinion. I think Batman is a creature that strikes at night from the shadows and uses fear as a weapon. I think that you have a younger character in a brightly colored outfit with a bat on their chest, it makes Batman less scary. Again, it makes him a guy, right? And he should never just be a guy. I believe that there should always be a legitimate argument in Gotham City that Batman is not a human being. Like, nobody should feel totally comfortable with the idea that Batman is just a guy in a bat suit. There should always be that little bit of Bigfoot around him, right? You know, like, he dropped the guy 30 floors straight down. There wasn't no blood in the body, right? Like there's got to be that. Otherwise, why is he dressed up like a bat? You know, it doesn't make any sense. So my controversial opinion is there's too many bat characters.
Right.
He's branded so many characters with the symbol that the symbol doesn't have any native power anymore.
Right.
So I would like to have Duke figure it out. Like, figure out who he wants to be, what he wants to represent. If he's the signal of what? What does he symbolically represent, the signal, right? So I think all those things are interesting to explore.
And there's precedent for it because, you know, there are other members of the Bat family, like the Spoiler or the Huntress, who don't have bat symbols on their costume.
I think you got to be your own person after a while. I think, you know, yeah, but that's just me. I mean, that's probably why they never get me to write Batman comics, because, like, I'm that guy. Like, if I were to write a Batman series, like a Bruce Batman, or Jace Batman, right? I would be giving you, like, Batman stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it would feel like, you know, the kinds of seminal sort of Batman stories that I grew up with. I think you can't make him too colloquial. You can't make him too chummy. You can't make him too talkative, right? It's sort of, I call it the Darth Vader thing. So one of the reasons why Darth Vader is an awesome character, he's got two things. One, Vader rarely asks a question. Two, he never stops to talk to anybody. You've got to catch up with him. And that's why he's so awesome. If you go back through Star Wars and you look at it, he, like, never asks a question. He always makes an affirmative statement, right? Like the only time Vader asks a question, I believe, in the entirety of the Star Wars trilogy is when he says he will come to me, to the Emperor, in Return of the Jedi. Every other time, Vader makes an affirmative statement, right? And so I kind of have, like, the same sort of Batman-esque rules, right? There are just things that he doesn't stand in a brightly lit room. He should not be standing in a brightly lit room dressed like a bat.
Yeah.
That's weird, right? Like, he should not be, in classic form, he should not be conversing with his enemies in a way that reduces him down to a man. He should always be using fear and theatricality as a weapon. And I like the idea of him helping people find their way through what he's learned. But I think ultimately they have to be their own people.
Nancy says, another question was, well, Calrissian, did he survive?
Sure. Right. Two questions.
Two questions.
Yeah, as he choked the guy where the plans, that one doesn't count.
That was a rhetorical question.
That's a rhetorical question.
When you're choking somebody out.
Rhetorical question. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why he's awesome. Is like he's like, not a lot of questions coming out of Darth. You know,
DC Comics has us under embargo regarding sharing images from the book until tomorrow, unfortunately. so I can't show anything other than these covers that have already been released. What can you tell people what they can expect out of this book?
Oh, well, one of the things that I like to do is I like to take sort of like the bigger things and then funnel them down into something that I think is compelling on an emotional level. And so we've got a situation in the DC universe where metahumans, the tide has turned against metahumans. Socially, they are being harangued through Amanda Waller and her enhanced prejudice. And so we're dealing with that sort of issue. And we have someone in Atlanta who's taking metahuman lives with a personal connection to one of the heroes in the power company. And that starts a daisy chain of events that brings Jace Fox, Batman, into this scenario. And they're trying to stop him before he kills again.
And what should the fans... Oh, here we go. A super chat. Common Sense. Thank you. Would you write a comic about Bloodwind? He got a resurgence thanks to Superman Action Comics. He would be a good member of the Justice League Dark.
If I could find a decent story, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I could see you doing that. A Justice League Dark book with Bloodwind, who is now the Superman of the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a cool book for you to work on.
Yeah.
Given your occult predilection. In terms of action, story, character development, what can fans look forward to with this story that you've written?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think because I'm me, I feel like I'm exploring Jason a bit of a different way than he's been explored before. And I think this fragile alliance of the power company, this collection of these different heroes, aligned largely with the same purpose under the influence of a man that I'm not sure can fully be trusted, right? Like, that's interesting interplay there. But I would say you're going to get very human moments and interactions with these characters in what I think is, in its size, an interesting, somewhat provocative psychological story about prejudice, violence, retribution, and teamwork and trust.
All right. Well, this book goes on sale April 30th.
April 30th.
If you haven't done so already, contact your LCS today or tomorrow and tell them to make sure that they pull, well, I don't know if we probably passed the FOC, but definitely ask them to pre-order it for you. Tell them it's not too late for your LCS to go ahead and put in an order for this book, which releases on April 30th.
Indeed.
I have had the opportunity to read it. As I said, it's a dope book. It's going to hit at angles of these characters that you will not expect. I will say that. And that's what makes it intriguing. And there's action too.
And there's action too.
Bryan, thank you very much for being with us again.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome back anytime. Please come back soon. I'm really going to look, let me tell you something. With Ultimate Black Panther, you said you're going to explore that whole Child of the Light in issue 17 or so. Black Panther fans like myself, who are T'Challa Forever fans, are really intrigued by the possibility of Ultimate Black Panther and Ultimate Storm having some type of encounter.
Sure.
A relationship, etc. So, yeah.
I receive the fact that people are intrigued. And we shall see how I'm dealing with these two characters. But I think people will be interested and satisfied, but not satisfied in the way that they would expect. I'll say that.
That both intrigues me and scares the crap out of me.
That's what I exist to do. That would be the intention. Yes, that would be the intention.
All right, man. Thank you all for watching tonight. Again, if you haven't already, please help the Black Comic Lords out. Hit the like button just right now. Just take a second. Hit the like button.
Hit the like button.
Share the video.
Thank you everyone for the super chats and everyone for paying attention for so long. If you're still here, support independent media, support your local comic book shops. Thank you for your support. If you've picked up books of mine or read my work and liked it, or given me positive feedback on social media when I'm there. I'm not always there, but you know, I do eventually see it. So just thank you very much and appreciate all of you.
Thank you all. Black Comic Lords, we got you.